If you've ever wondered what's the best kebab you can make with everyday simple ingredients, this video is for you. These Egyptian koftas are made with 6 ingredients that you probably already have at home, and yet it makes the juiciest, tastiest kofta ever. A lot of recipes for kofta turn out dry or they fall apart on the grill, but the secrets I'm about to show you turn this simple and easy recipe into a dish that all your Arab friends will envy. The key to this recipe is 2 ingredients and how you treat them. First is minced meat with a relatively high fat content, and the second one is onions. Let's start off with the onions. You're going to shred 2 to 3 onions into tiny little pieces, and to do this I'm adding them to a mini food processor, but you can use a grater instead. I'm going to pulse them for a short while until they're nice and small and pretty much turn into a paste. Adding finely minced onions like these to kofta introduces an ingredient that has loads of moisture and is pretty good at retaining a juicy texture, even when it's cooked. Now these small pieces of onion actually have too much moisture to use right away. Although we want to add moisture, too much will make the kofta mixture loose and then it will easily fall off the skewers. So we need to drain a bunch of liquid from the onions, and you can do that by putting them in a strainer. Last time we did this, it took a long time to drain, and I also broke the strainer by being impatient. So this time around I used a nut milk bag instead, which is basically a cheesecloth sewn into a pouch. You just add the onions in and then it will drain pretty quick. A clean tea towel will also work the same way. You want to drain off about 70 to 80% of the liquid from the onion so that it ends up slightly moist and not too dry. After I took mine out, you can see it kind of looked flaky and I felt this was too dry for our mixture. So what I'm doing is I'm adding a bunch of the onion juice back to the mixture and mixing it back in. You want it to kind of have this texture where grabbing a piece of onion makes your fingers wet and moist, but you don't want it to feel soaking wet like when it's just been freshly grated. Once you have that, you're done with the onion juice. If you're looking for a use for it, we use it in this other kebab marinade. Now the other key ingredient is the meat, and whatever type you use, it needs to have about 30% fat. As you grill your kofta, the fat will melt and form little pockets of juice and small holes in which meat and onion juices gather, and that makes it super juicy. It's also essential to cooking the kofta, because when you place kofta over a fire, the meat obviously warms up and the fat starts to melt. So you're in a race against time to form a skin before the meat falls off the skewer. The extra fat fries the outside and quickly forms that skin so your skewer stays together. So I'm using 1.5 kilograms of lamb mince, though beef is a common option as well, or even go 50-50. The important thing is to use the meat cold straight from the fridge, and I'll explain why later. You can see the distinct threads of fat running through this lamb, and one other thing that helps is using medium ground mince that isn't all pasty and homogeneous and doesn't look like something you can plaster a wall with. A little texture is going to help the mixture. And so now you just put it together. So in a large bowl, add the minced meat, then 160 grams of the onion pieces that you strained. In Egyptian kofta we also add a little parsley, which adds a lovely fresh flavour. Take 25 grams of parsley and chop off the stalks because their texture isn't great, then give the parsley leaves a quick chop so you have small pieces about this big. And that will leave you with about 13 grams of chopped parsley, all of which goes into the bowl. The only ingredients left are the 3 seasonings, though you only really need the first 2. First is 3 teaspoons of salt, then you have 2.5 teaspoons of black pepper, and half a teaspoon of cayenne or any other chili powder. You can leave out the cayenne and replace it with more black pepper, or even swap half a teaspoon of black pepper for extra cayenne if you want it spicier. And with that in there, all you need to do is knead the mixture. So roll up your sleeves and get over your fear of raw meat because this is actually critical to the recipe. The kneading serves 2 purposes. First, it makes sure the meat is well seasoned with the onion and spices, but secondly, it makes the meat sticky. Just like kneading flour into a dough forms gluten, kneading meat makes the protein strands in meat tightly bind together. That sticky appearance meat develops, and the literal stringy threads you see after a few minutes of kneading are exactly what you want. They'll make the kofta mixture stick to itself and the skewer so it doesn't fall off. If you were to knead this in a food processor or stand mixer, those strands won't develop, but luckily it only takes 4 to 5 minutes by hand, so it's pretty easy. And once your mixture looks like this, you are 90% done with the recipe. You're almost ready to use the mixture, but first you need to cool it down. As you kneaded this, your hands introduced heat that starts to melt the fat, and if too much of it melts, the mixture can become oily and break before you start cooking it. This is why you want to use the meat cold from the fridge. In hot countries like Egypt, they even refrigerate it halfway through mixing to stop it from getting too warm. So stretch over some plastic wrap and put this in your fridge for at least 1 full hour. If you're making a double batch like me, you should even split this into 2 bowls so it can cool down quicker. Now while it's in the fridge, I'd suggest using 2 minutes to make a tahini sauce because kofta and tahini are an S-tier combination. Into a bowl or blender, add 75 grams of yogurt, 50 grams of tahini paste, 20 milliliters of lemon juice and 50 milliliters of water. Season it with a 1/4 teaspoon each of salt, black pepper, ground cumin and cayenne chili powder. That all gets mixed very thoroughly until you have a smooth mixture, and it should have a kind of pourable consistency like this. If you want to make double the sauce, make double it. If you want it a bit more runny, add more water, but I think this is perfect. So when the hour of rest time is up, it's time to skewer the meat, and obviously you're going to need some skewers. These are flat kebab skewers, and they're pretty universal across Turkish, Middle Eastern and Central Asian cuisine. Their wide and flat shape means they can support a seemingly large piece of meat, while at the same time not leaving a massive hole through the middle. They also sit flat on either side, making it easy to rotate the koftas. Without these, you can try use some thinner metal ones like these square ones, but the meat will have less surface area to stick to, and if all you have are these wooden ones, I'd suggest you make the kofta a lot smaller than mine. You can also forego the skewers completely and roll the meat into sausage shapes, then cook them directly on the grates. The skewers do make for better kofta though, and here's the technique I use to shape them. Grab a ball of meat about half the size of a burger bun and kind of shape it into an oval looking blob. You then want to shove the skewer into the middle of it and form the meat around it so that it reaches the other side. Then start pressing the two halves together. I've got the meat sitting in the palm of my hand and my thumb on the other side, and by opening and closing my hand like this repeatedly, I'm pressing the meat into a fairly uniform shape. You want to rotate the skewer and do this back and forth, applying the same pressure each time you squeeze, and you'll get the hang of it pretty quick. This movement also presses the meat into the skewer so it sticks well and won't fall off. So yeah, just work the meat like this, flipping it a few times and working the thicker parts down so they're not too chunky. In the end, you want your skewer to look like this. The metal should be pretty much centered in the middle of the meat. If there's too much on one side, just squish it over to the other side, as too much weight can also cause it to fall off the skewers. In total, this recipe should make about 10 to 12 skewers. I wouldn't make any extra large ones because that just complicates cooking and makes them more delicate. One thing that helps ensure the skewers don't fall apart is to let them rest after shaping. If they fit, 10 minutes in your fridge will help massively, or leave them on the counter for about 20 minutes to air dry. If you're in a really hot climate, a pretty good hack is to use a fan to cool them down and speed up the air drying process. And all you're left with now is to cook the kofta. Your coals should be really hot, but you want them white, not on fire. You also want the heat to be fairly close to where the skewers will be. Place your skewers over the coals, and then for the first 2 minutes, rotate the skewers every 20 to 30 seconds. The goal is to sear a skin onto both sides of the meat before it heats up and falls off the skewer. Once both sides have a slightly firm appearance, you can rotate them every 60 seconds instead, but use your judgment to keep the cook fairly even on both sides. In total, they need about 6 minutes of grilling, and that should leave them with a nicely seared exterior and super juicy centre. If the meat falls off of any of the skewers, just roll it into a sausage and place it on top of a grate. By the way, you better make this because I was grilling at 10 PM, which is why it's dark when I'm filming, and I'm pretty sure my neighbours are plotting their revenge. Once all the skewers are cooked, pull them off of the grill. Just be careful handling them because the skewers themselves will be really hot. Now let's admire our handiwork for a moment. I don't think I've seen a video on YouTube with juicier looking kofta. It's literally oozing, and these are going to be incredible. Just grab the kofta with some bread and wiggle back and forth to release it from the skewer, and it should slide right off. Break into it, and that is one hell of a cross section. You want to serve these right away before they cool down, so put a layer of parsley on some bread and add the koftas over the top. If you want to make a sandwich, add some tahini to bread, top it with a sprinkle of parsley and a stick or two of kofta. Add some sliced tomato and salty cucumber pickles to turn this into one of the best grilled sandwiches of your life. It's too late to be eating a meaty sandwich, but this is just too good. That kofta is just so juicy, it's dripping down my hands, and honestly, it is such an incredible bite. Bread is falling apart, but honestly, you need to make this.